Victor Kane hadn't planned on spending his only free Saturday morning standing in a grocery store checkout line, holding a screaming toddler in one arm and a pack of off-brand diapers in the other. "Daddy, I want the blue juice," cried his 4-year-old son Dylan, his cheeks red and wet. Victor sighed, bouncing him gently. "We'll get it next time, bud. We're short this week, remember." Dylan wailed louder. People behind them shifted restlessly. Victor kept his gaze down, trying to ignore the stares. His work boots were dusty, jeans worn out at the knees. He hadn't shaved in days, and the circles under his eyes made him look 10 years older than 33. "Sir," a soft voice came from behind. Victor turned and saw her. A woman with sleek dark hair pulled into a low bun, sunglasses perched on her head, and a little girl in her arms, maybe 3 years old, crying just as hard as Dylan. I'm sorry," the woman said, her voice shaky. "Would you mind if I go ahead? She's having a meltdown and adjust." She looked down at her daughter, who was now hiccuping through sobs. Victor glanced at the long line ahead and then at her eyes hazel, tired but kind. He stepped aside without hesitation. "Go ahead, I get it," he said. "I've been in your shoes, still am." She blinked, surprised. "Are you sure?" "Positive, I've got time. She looks like she needs a nap more than I need these diapers." A small laugh escaped her. "Thank you, really." The cashier rang up her things quickly. Victor tried not to notice the designer handbag on her arm or the fact that she didn't flinch when the total crossed $100. She took her bags, flashed him a grateful smile, and disappeared into the parking lot. Victor finally paid for the diapers, milk, and bread, barely covering it with the cash he had left. He carried Dylan out to his beat-up Toyota and buckled him in. As he was about to pull out, someone knocked on his window. It was her. He rolled it down. "Everything okay?" She smiled, breathless. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. Just here." She handed him a small brown paper bag. "You forgot the juice." He stared at the bag, stunned. Inside was the exact blue juice Dylan had been crying over. He looked back up at her, speechless. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she said quickly. "It's not a big deal." "I can't take this." "You already did something kind for me. Let me return the favor." Victor hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." "I'm Vivian," she said, offering her hand. He shook it, calloused fingers brushing her smooth palm. "Victor, and that mess back there is Dylan." She smiled at the boy, who peeked at her from behind his juice box. "Hi, Dylan." "Hi," he whispered. She waved and turned to leave. Victor watched her walk away, thinking that was the last he'd see of her. It wasn't. 3 days later, Victor was running late to his second job at a local mechanic's garage when his boss, Hank, called him into the office. "You're getting pulled onto a private job," Hank said. "Some hotshot exec needs an emergency engine repair on her Benz. She's paying double if we go now." Victor wiped his hands on a rag. "I'll go." When he pulled up to the sleek black gate of a glass and steel mansion on the edge of the city, he felt out of place the second he stepped out of his truck. A housekeeper led him to the garage. The car was spotless, and the engine problem was minor, something he could fix in under an hour. He was halfway through when he heard heels clicking behind him. "Hey, thank you for coming so fast," my assistant said. He turned around. Vivian froze. Victor stood up, wiping his hands. "Vivian." She blinked. "Victor, wait, you're the mechanic." He nodded slowly. "And you live here?" She looked embarrassed. Yeah." There was a long pause. "I didn't expect to see you again," she said, laughing nervously. "I didn't even know your last name." "Kane," he replied. "Victor Kane." "I'm Vivian Valen." Something about hearing her full name made something click. He'd seen it before on a billboard or maybe a magazine cover. She was the CEO of a tech firm, Valen Tech. She noticed the realization hit him. "I didn't mean to lie," she said quietly. "I just wanted to be a mom in a grocery store for 5 minutes without it being a whole thing." "I get it," he said honestly. "You don't owe me an explanation." She smiled. "Still, I wanted to say thank you again. You were kind when you didn't have to be." He looked at her, really looked. She was beautiful, yes, but she also looked tired. Human, real. "You're welcome," he said, "and thanks for the juice." She laughed, and it lit up her whole face. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked suddenly. "I mean, when you're done, if you have time." Victor paused. "I've got 20 minutes before I'm due at the garage." "Then come inside," she said, turning toward the house. "I promise it's just coffee." He followed her inside, boots heavy on the marble floor. Dylan's voice echoed in his head. "Daddy, I want the blue juice." And now here he was, drinking espresso in a penthouse kitchen with a woman who could buy the whole block he lived on. "You're not what I expected," she said, handing him a cup. "Let me guess, less grease." She laughed. "No, I mean, you're calm, gentle. Most guys who find out what I do either try to impress me or act weird, but you didn't." "I don't have time to impress anyone," he said simply. "I've got a kid, 2 jobs, and a leaky roof." Vivian looked at him, really looked. "Your wife." Left when Dylan was 2, she didn't sign up for the struggle. "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "It's life." But the way she looked at him was different now. Like she saw something deeper than just worn boots and calloused hands. Like maybe, just maybe, she wanted to see more. And Victor, he hadn't felt that in a long time. Not from anyone. Especially not from someone like her. Victor didn't expect to hear from her again. He told himself it was a one-time thing, coffee in an immaculate kitchen he'd never belong in, with a woman so far outside his world it was almost laughable. But 4 days later, a sleek black SUV pulled up beside him right as he was locking up the auto shop. The back window rolled down. Vivian sat in the passenger seat, hair loose this time, her eyes catching the fading sunlight. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, lifting a brown paper bag. "Pulled pork sandwiches. I got extra pickles just in case." He glanced around the empty lot. "You tracked me down." "I asked Hank where you'd be. He grumbled a lot but eventually caved when I said it was for lunch. I promised not to get you fired." Victor walked over slowly. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said gently, "but I wanted to." He hesitated, but the smell of warm bread and smoked meat was enough to tilt the scales. "All right," he said, "but only if you eat with me." "I was counting on it." They sat on the tailgate of his truck, the city skyline in the distance. Vivian kicked off her heels and tucked her feet under her, like she'd done it 1,000 times. "So," she said, biting into her sandwich, "what did you want to be before life got complicated?" He wiped his hands on a napkin. "A pilot." She blinked in surprise. "Seriously?" "Yeah, I used to lie on the roof when I was a teenager and watch planes go by. I like the idea of going somewhere no one knew me, flying above everything." "And what stopped you?" "My dad died when I was 17. My mom fell apart. I dropped out to work, never went back." Vivian didn't respond right away. She just nodded, absorbing it like it wasn't a tragedy, but a truth. "You," he asked, nodding at her, "what did you want to be before the boardrooms and billion-dollar deals?" She gave a low laugh. "A dancer." He raised an eyebrow. "Ballet," she explained. "I was obsessed. Had a scholarship lined up. Then I tore a ligament during rehearsal my senior year. Surgery couldn't fix it completely, that was that. They fell into silence for a moment, the kind that didn't feel heavy. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "Every time I hear Tchaikovsky." She looked at him, then down at his grease-stained hands, and her voice dropped. "You know, I think people forget that dreams don't die cleanly. They rot slowly until one day you realize they're gone." Victor didn't say anything. He didn't need to. They both understood. The next week, she showed up again. This time, on a Tuesday evening, outside his apartment complex. Dylan was playing with a beat-up toy fire truck on the cracked sidewalk when Vivian stepped out of her car. Victor came down the stairs 2 at a time. "Is something wrong?" "No," she said quickly. "I just thought maybe Dylan would like to meet my daughter. Elise's been asking about the juice boy." Victor looked down at his son. "What do you think, buddy?" Dylan nodded shyly, then reached for Victor's hand. They drove to a quiet park on the west side of town. Elise and Dylan ran toward the swings while the adults sat on a bench nearby. "You didn't have to come all the way here," Victor said, watching the kids. "I wanted to see where you live," she said honestly. "Not in a weird way. I wanted to understand." He turned to her. "Understand what?" "What your life looks like, what your days feel like. You keep telling me I don't owe you anything, but maybe I do." "I didn't say you owed me anything." "But I feel like I do," she said softly. "Because whenever I'm with you, I stop feeling like I'm being watched, measured, expected to perform." Victor studied her. "That's what your world feels like." She looked away. "Like I'm always 15 seconds away from disappointing everyone. Shareholders, investors, even Elise. And then I met you, and you didn't want a damn thing from me. You didn't even know who I was and still let me go ahead in line. I just saw a mom with a tired kid." "Exactly, you saw me, not what I represent." Dylan squealed as Elise pushed him on the swing. Victor smiled faintly. "They're good together." "They are." He turned to her. "But this thing, whatever it is, it gets complicated fast. You know that, right?" "I'm not afraid of complicated," she said. "I live in it." Victor didn't respond. He just leaned back on the bench, watching the sun drop behind the rooftops. Eventually, he said, "I can't give you what you're used to." She didn't look at him. "Maybe I'm tired of what I'm used to." That night, he walked her back to her car, Dylan asleep on his shoulder. Elise was curled up in her car seat, thumb in her mouth. Vivian rested her hand briefly on Victor's arm. "If I asked you to dinner, just the two of us, would you say yes?" He looked at her, the question hanging between them. "Only if I can bring the good shirt," he said finally, eyes warm. She laughed, breath-catching. "Deal." She drove off, headlights disappearing down the street. Victor stood there for a long time, the weight of his son in his arms, the warmth of her touch still lingering on his sleeve. He didn't know where this was going, but for the first time in years, he wanted to find out. Victor stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of the only button-down shirt he owned that didn't have a stain or fraying at the cuffs. Dylan sat on the edge of the bed, swinging his legs and watching him with sleepy curiosity. "Are you going to that fancy dinner now?" Dylan asked, rubbing his eye. Victor nodded while tucking in the hem of his shirt. "Just for a little while. Miss Clara's downstairs if you need anything, okay." "Will she make the dinosaur mac and cheese?" "She promised," Victor said, brushing a hand over his son's curls. "Be good for her, all right." Dylan gave a solemn nod, already distracted by the idea of dinner shaped like prehistoric creatures. Victor kissed the top of his head and grabbed his jacket. The apartment building's hallway smelled faintly of old paint and fried onions, and the elevator wheezed before groaning open. When he stepped outside, a silver town car was waiting at the curb. The driver opened the door without a word. Victor slid into the backseat, feeling out of place against the leather interior and faint scent of cologne that didn't belong to him. The city blurred past the windows in streaks of gold and blue, and he kept his hands folded tightly in his lap. The car pulled up in front of a restaurant he'd only seen in magazines, the kind with a name so short it barely made sense, and no prices on the menu. The host greeted him by name and led him through a dimly lit dining room where the walls shimmered like onyx, and every table was lit by a single, flickering candle. Vivian was already seated. Her dress was midnight blue, simple but elegant, and shimmered subtly when she moved. Her hair was pinned up in a way that revealed the graceful line of her neck. She stood when she saw him, her expression unreadable for a beat, and then something softened behind her eyes. "You clean up well," she said, voice low. Victor gave a half laugh. "Took me 20 minutes just to iron this thing, not sure I got all the wrinkles out." She gestured to the chair across from her. "You look great." As he sat down, a waiter appeared with a bottle of wine already uncorked. Vivian glanced at him. "Is red all right?" "I've only ever had it in a box," he replied. That made her laugh, not the polite kind, but a real, unguarded laugh that made her shoulders relax. They ordered something with words Victor didn't recognize but was too proud to admit. When the plates arrived, the portions were small enough to fit on a saucer, but the flavors were rich in a way he hadn't expected. "Tell me something about you I'd never guess," she said, resting her chin on her hand. Victor set down his fork. "I used to write songs, nothing professional, just lyrics. When Dylan's asleep, sometimes I still do." Her eyebrows lifted. "That's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" She considered him, someone who didn't have time for dreams anymore. "I don't, but I make space for them anyway. Otherwise, I forget who I am." She nodded like that struck something in her. Then she leaned back, swirling her wine. "Can I tell you something ridiculous?" she asked. "Only if I can laugh at it. I once fired my florist because she used peonies instead of ranunculus at a launch party." Victor raised an eyebrow. "That is ridiculous." She laughed again, but there was something brittle in it. "I think I lost perspective somewhere. Used to care about real things." "Then maybe you just needed the wrong flowers to remember that." Her smile faded into something quieter. "You're not like anyone I know." "I could say the same." The waiter brought dessert, something with caramel and sea salt that melted when touched, and for a while, they didn't speak. The silence felt natural this time. Outside, the air had cooled. Vivian wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and walked beside him toward the car. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like if things had gone differently?" she asked. "If you'd become a pilot, if I never tore that ligament." Victor looked up at the sky. "Sometimes, but then I wouldn't have Dylan, and you wouldn't be Elise's mom." She paused by the car door. "I think about that too, the what-ifs. But then I think maybe this," she glanced at him, "is where I was always supposed to end up." The driver opened the door, but neither of them moved. Victor hesitated. "I should go." "You could come back," she said suddenly. He turned to her. "To your place." She shook her head. "No, not tonight. I meant, come back to this, to us, to figuring out what this even is." He didn't answer right away. The invitation hung between them, tentative but real. "I want to," he said at last, "but I don't know how this works. You're the kind of person who's on magazine covers. I'm the kind who fixes the engine of the car delivering the magazine." She stepped closer. "I'm not asking you to change. I'm asking you to let me in." Victor searched her face, trying to find the catch, but there was none, just her, just this strange, impossible thing unfolding between them. He nodded slowly. "All right, let's see where it goes." She kissed his cheek softly, briefly, and then slid into the car. The door closed, and the vehicle pulled away, leaving him standing under a flickering streetlight. Victor didn't move for a while. He didn't need to. For once, the world could wait. 2 weeks passed. Not in a whirlwind, but in the slow, deliberate rhythm of real-life balancing schedules, trading nights off, and syncing weekends with the awkward dance of two people trying to fit into each other's worlds without shaking the foundations of their own. Victor didn't quit the garage. Vivian didn't cancel her board meetings, but little by little, they carved out space. Sometimes it was morning coffee on the front steps of his building before the city woke up. Other times, it was a late dinner at her place, with Dylan and Elise asleep on the couch tangled in blankets, their heads resting on opposite ends, the television still playing silent cartoons. Then came the gala. Vivian hadn't brought it up until the last minute, and even then, only with hesitation. "It's a fundraiser," she said, one evening while they sat on the small balcony outside her bedroom. "Black tie, cameras, press, all of it." Victor leaned back in the metal chair. "Sounds like your arena." "It's not really mine anymore," she admitted, "but I'm expected to be there, and I want you to come." He looked at her steady. "You sure? It's a long fall from a red carpet." She nodded. "I'm not worried about that. I'm worried you'll hate it." "I probably will," he said, "but if you're asking, I'll be there." She exhaled, relief flickering across her face. The night of the event, a tailor arrived at Victor's apartment with a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, down to the cuffs. Clara, the neighbor who'd become Dylan's honorary aunt, arrived with a stack of puzzles and warm chocolate chip cookies. Dylan didn't even blink when Victor kissed his forehead and promised to be home before sunrise. The venue was a restored opera house downtown. All gold filigree and sweeping staircases, with a glass chandelier the size of a small car suspended above a marble foyer. As Victor stepped from the car, the press lights flashed instantly. He kept his head down. Vivian moved beside him with practiced ease, her hand resting lightly on his forearm. Her dress shimmered like starlight beneath the chandeliers, but her eyes stayed on him. "You all right?" she asked quietly. "I feel like a wrench in a jewelry box." She laughed under her breath. "You look like the only man here who belongs." Inside, the conversations flowed like champagne shallow, expensive, and laced with veiled competition. Vivian introduced him simply as Victor Kane, without embellishment. No titles, no qualifiers, just his name. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. And when the music began and the crowd shifted to the ballroom, she reached for his hand without hesitation. "I haven't danced in years," she said as they stepped onto the floor. "I haven't danced ever," he replied. She smiled, and this time it wasn't polished or poised, it was nervous, hopeful, real. He rested his hand lightly on her waist. "Just tell me if I'm about to step on your foot." "I'll survive," she whispered. They moved slowly, quietly, the music rising around them. Victor watched the way her eyes softened when they weren't surrounded by strategy and spotlights. She watched the way he stayed grounded, even here. "I don't think I ever told you what happened after Elise was born," she said as they danced. He shook his head. "You didn't." "My ex walked out a week later, said he felt trapped, that he wasn't cut out for fatherhood." Victor didn't speak. "I kept pretending like I was fine," she continued. "Built a company, raised her, smiled for interviews, but I was always waiting for someone to see it. That I was holding everything together with duct tape and caffeine." He stared at her for a long moment, then said, "You didn't need saving." "No," she agreed, "but I wanted something steady, something real." He pulled her a little closer. A few feet away, a photographer lifted a camera. The flash burst, but neither of them turned. Later that night, in the quiet of her penthouse, Victor stood in the doorway of Elise's room. She and Dylan had fallen asleep in a pile of blankets on the floor, surrounded by coloring books and a half-built train set. Vivian approached quietly behind him. "He's good for her," she said softly. Victor nodded. "She's good for him too." She reached for his hand. "So are you." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You know this doesn't make sense on paper." "I know, but I'm tired of paper." Her voice trembled slightly. "I want something that works beyond the numbers, beyond the image. I want you." He stepped closer. "You want the guy with the rusted truck and the patchy roof?" "Yes," she said, no hesitation. "Because you show up, you don't pretend, you don't run." He brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "You scare the hell out of me." "Good," she whispered, "then we're even." He kissed her then, without an audience, without a backdrop, without a spotlight. Just the two of them in a hallway lit by a nightlight shaped like a moon, the quiet breathing of their children behind the bedroom door. Weeks later, they stood together in front of a modest two-story house with a yard full of stubborn weeds and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. It wasn't in the glossy parts of town, but it had enough bedrooms, a working furnace, and a tree strong enough for a tire swing. Vivian looked up at it, barefoot in jeans, her hair undone. "I could get used to this," she said. Victor wrapped an arm around her waist. "You sure? You'll have to learn how to make pancakes that don't come from a hotel chef." She tilted her head. "Only if you promise to keep fixing everything I break." He grinned. "Deal." Inside, Dylan and Elise were racing through empty rooms, their laughter echoing off bare walls. Vivian leaned into him. "You know what I realized?" "What?" "All those years, I thought I needed someone who could keep up with me, but what I really needed was someone who could slow me down." Victor watched the kids disappear around a corner. "And I needed someone to remind me I still had something worth chasing." She turned toward him. "So what does that make us?" He pulled her close, his voice low. "It makes us home." And this time, there were no crowds, no cameras, no questions. Just two people who had nothing to prove, and everything to build together. The first real test came on a Tuesday. Vivian's phone buzzed non-stop from the moment she stepped out of the shower. By noon, the headlines were everywhere: photos of her and Victor from the gala, wrenched out of context, paired with brutal speculation about her new mechanic boyfriend, and how it might affect Valen Tech's upcoming IPO. She sat frozen in the plush chair beside her office window, the city stretching far below. Her assistant had already called twice, HR once, and two board members had left voicemails asking for clarity. The media didn't care about context. They cared about contrast Valen Tech's icy CEO and the blue-collar single dad from the wrong side of the tracks. The worst part, she hadn't seen it coming. When Victor called, she almost let it go to voicemail. But she answered. "I saw the articles," he said without preamble. She kept her voice steady. "It'll pass. They always look for something to rip apart before a big launch." There was a pause. "You okay?" he asked. Vivian stared out at the skyline. "I don't know." "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I know," she replied. "That's what scares me." Later that night, she came home to find him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, chopping vegetables while Dylan and Elise colored at the table. The air smelled like garlic and rosemary. Music played softly in the background, something calm, instrumental. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there watching. He didn't turn around. "You hungry?" She walked in slowly. "You're cooking." "I Googled how to roast chicken. Might be a disaster, but I figured it's time, contributed something edible." She smiled faintly and perched on a stool. "You didn't have to." I know, he said, setting the knife down, but I wanted to. They didn't talk about the headlines again. Instead, after the kids went to bed, they curled up on the oversized couch in the den. Vivian rested her head on his shoulder, her fingers tangled with his. I've spent years controlling every narrative, she murmured. Now, can't even control the one about my own heart. Victor looked down at her. Then maybe it's time to stop controlling it. The next morning, she walked into the boardroom 15 minutes early, wearing no makeup, a navy blazer, and a pair of flats. Her team fell silent. I know some of you are concerned about recent press coverage, she began, calm and measured. So, I'll be clear. Who I choose to love doesn't diminish my competence. It enhances my humanity. Someone shifted in their seat. I built this company from the ground up, she continued, and I'll keep building it with people who judge me by results, not rumors. When she stepped out of the meeting, her assistant handed her a note. No envelope, just a folded slip of paper. In Victor's handwriting. You don't have to fight them alone. I'm here every step. 3 months later, they bought the house. The kids shared a bedroom for a while, but eventually Elise insisted on purple wallpaper and her own bookshelf, and Dylan asked for a bunk bed even though he slept on the bottom every night. Victor fixed the leaky gutters himself. Vivian planted lavender in the front garden, even though she had no idea what she was doing. On weekends, they drove out of the city, no plans, no schedules, just fields, farm stands, and whatever road felt least traveled. One Saturday morning, she found him in the backyard, kneeling beside the tire swing he'd finally hung. He was tying a ribbon to the chain, blue and white, fluttering in the breeze. She stepped outside, barefoot in the grass. What's the occasion? He stood up slowly, dusting off his jeans. You once said dreams don't die cleanly, he said, but they can come back, sometimes in pieces, sometimes in new shapes. She tilted her head. What are you saying? He pulled something from his back pocket, a small box square, velvet, simple. Her breath caught. I don't need a stage or a spotlight. I just need you, he said. You, me, Dylan, Elise, and this crooked little yard. She didn't speak. Her throat tightened so fast she could barely breathe. Marry me, Vivian. Tears stung her eyes. She nodded, unable to speak, then threw her arms around him, laughter breaking through the sob in her chest. I didn't think I'd ever want this again, she whispered, but with you, it feels like I never stopped wanting it. That summer, they married in the backyard. Elise was the flower girl. Dylan held the rings. Clara officiated, wearing a dress with too many ruffles and crying halfway through the vows. The neighbors brought folding chairs. The cake was lemon with raspberry filling made by a retired baker from down the street. There were no photographers, no headlines. Just love, real, grounded, fiercely earned love. Later that night, after the kids were asleep and the guests had gone, they sat on the porch, swing in the dark, swaying gently beneath the stars. I used to think I had to choose, she said softly, between love and success, between being seen and being safe. Victor kissed the side of her head. Now you don't. No, she said, curling into his side. Now I just get to be happy. And she was. Not because the world had changed, but because she had. Because he had. Because they had built something stronger than circumstance. Something unshakable. Together,